I'm Jim Check. You're watching Now Media. With me, Matt Hatfield from Open Media. And we're going to talk about something that we always talk about here on Now Media, Bill C-18 and the crippling effects it's really had on, especially on local independent media that, has to kind of, find a way to fund its way to distribute news to the public. And we had, just from our own perspective, we had a very large Facebook audience and Instagram audience, and we figured out how to turn that into, how we could have an actual successful business model in media, and especially in these challenging times for media. Did you freeze? I think he froze. No, he's there. There you go. How do you guys see Bill C-18, Matt?
Well, we see it as having identified a real problem and taken a very destructive approach to fixing that problem. So it is true that there is less funding available for many media outlets than there used to be, and that in many cases local news has suffered the most. But unfortunately, Bill C-18 really misread the relationship with platforms, how central news was to platforms versus platforms to news. And unfortunately for many outlets like yourselves, just took an absolute axe to the audience that many small outlets had on social media. A lot of people were finding an audience there. And because Meta saw no financial incentive in continuing the relationship, now you can't post news anywhere on any Meta platform, which of course is Instagram, Facebook, and other outlets.
Yeah, to add insult to injury, when Justin Trudeau was in town, because this has been devastating for us, right? We lost our audience of 200,000 we earned serving this community, especially during wildfires. That's where most people get their news. We asked Justin Trudeau about, repealing Bill C-18 and, explained how crippling it was. And he said that, that he would stand against the, basically the evil empire of Facebook, and then they will boycott Facebook and, until they bow down and actually fund local journalism. And the sad reality is, if you look at Facebook's chart, it hasn't affected Facebook at all. I mean, they're at all-time highs. It really has meant nothing. We're the only G7 nation that has news banned on Facebook and Instagram. And then lo and behold, Mark Carney takes over as PM. And in January of this year, they started advertising again. They broke their boycott of Meta. And they spent, last time we checked, I think it was in March, they spent over $5 million on Meta. And the reason they gave us, it was that Meta is too important a platform to ignore, because they need to get their message out to people on Facebook. And so the only way they could do it is to pay for it. And at the same time, we can't get our news on there. Yeah, and I'm just getting a note here from our managing editor saying, he reached out to the Privy Council office and asking what that update is on spending on Facebook, and now they're refusing to provide the number.
And of course, all the political parties also spend very heavily on Facebook in their own marketing. Yeah,
and they say that's how important the Meta platform is. And then I did an interview with the National, CBC The National, and the drop off in what Canadians are getting for news is just because most Canadians get their news, and that's what the government said as well. The Canadians get their news from online. They don't really go to websites. They just get it online. And here it is, especially in the Okanagan, and that when we have wildfires, Canadians turn to social media for that. And again, we don't get the PM coming into Kelowna very often. We did get Mark Carney here just recently, so we did ask the Prime Minister again on Bill C-18 if he would repeal Bill C-18. And he says, you're not going to like the answer, which he was honest about that. He said, you're not going to like the answer. Their solution is to give more money to CBC, to fund local journalism through CBC. CBC does very little local journalism in valleys like this. It's all the small outlets that do the local journalism here.
That's interesting. I was at Senate last year, and the senators were pressing the CBC to explain why they weren't doing more to address the fact that many communities don't have any local outlet, not a private outlet, not a CBC reporter based in the community either. And I think the CBC was a bit shamed by that. But you're right, they are not closing this gap. And certainly many people would feel that CBC alone shouldn't be the only solution to local news, that we need a diversity of viewpoints in local communities.
What does your organization do to oppose Bill C-18? What is it that you guys are doing to kind of bring this to the attention of the government?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were glad to hear that Prime Minister Carney is reevaluating the situation. And I certainly hope he doesn't stop at just more funding for CBC as his solution. I think some outlets have gotten more money from Bill C-18's impact, but some outlets have not. And either way, fewer Canadians are seeing news, which is a huge concern. So in one way or another, they need to make it so that news reaches as many people as possible, rather than facing these kind of artificial constraints. That was a huge fundamental failing in C-18 that they just built in from the start. They treated news as something that had to be guarded and doled out, you know, to the select few once someone had paid, rather than really as a public good that we need to see distributed as widely as possible in this country.
I mean, that was our question of Carney on Bill C-18, and the National Post said, they read it as reevaluating. We didn't get that from there, and I imagine that's where you're getting that reevaluation, because his answer didn't appear to us sound like a reevaluation. It sounded like to us, you're not going to like the answer, we're going to give more money to CBC.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I guess maybe there's some wish casting there. People are hoping that he might reevaluate a little bit. I think relatively few people are incredibly happy with the outcome of Bill C-18. Even organizations and news outlets that fought for Bill C-18, I think, feel it's been a pretty qualified success or just a failure, even in their views. So I wouldn't be surprised if the base that had supported Bill C-18 has declined in its influence on Carney, and maybe there's an opportunity to do something else. We would like to see him do more to reward news consumer choice and help people support news of their own personal choice. So rather than people's funding going to some sort of government allocated central fund, maybe they could get a government voucher they could bring to you and say, actually, I want your outlet to receive my money.
Yeah, because the scheme kind of worked really. We had the most experienced newsroom. Like, we had the former CTV news bureau guy that ran the CTV desk here, and we had the guy that ran the business desk for the Daily Courier forever, and we've had these people here for a long time, and then plus, we have our managing editor from the Daily Mail. Like, we had the most experienced newsroom, yet the Liberal government selectively decide who gets funding, and they selectively decided we didn't. We do now. They say that we can now. We haven't received it yet, but they have now decided after 2 years or 3 years that we basically put on a starvation diet of our own means, and many outlets have caved. Kamloops this week, which is a local outlet, closed up completely, closed their newspaper, plus they closed their online platform, and they said right in their last press release, Bill C-18 killed us. CTV even put out a press release that said, we're laying off 4,800 people, Bill C-18 is the cause. And close to 100 outlets have failed across Canada since the inception of Bill C-18. And yet, we've talked to Pascal St-Onge and all that, and her response was to double the funding for CBC. Do you think the Liberal government really just wants one media outlet in Canada? Because it doesn't seem to have a diversity of voices with just one outlet being funded by the Liberal government.
I don't think they know what to do, frankly. I think give more money to the CBC is a very easy button for the government to push. I think they were probably scared of establishing a central public fund, in part because they were worried people would think that they were trying to control all of news. But I think because they didn't want to create any kind of single centralized system, they've created a really complex web of different funds that people are very confused by how they work, who is getting what money in what way. I think that is corrosive to trust in journalism, and I think they actually would have done better to establish one clear process that operated in a transparent manner where everyone could see this outlet got this amount of money, this is why, this outlet didn't, this is why. But we'd rather it wasn't the government making these decisions.
Yeah, shouldn't it be
like consumers.
At least a panel? If it was, the government funded, then it would be like an equal number of conservative, NDP, and Liberal, you know what I mean, as opposed to
totally
one party really deciding. Because we see in the election, I think this may have been the downfall of Pierre Poilievre as well, is because he went after media, saying he's going to defund the CBC and defund, get rid of Bill C-18, which is, to many outlets, thinking that's their livelihoods. And so they're fighting for their jobs, really, right? And then the other arm of the government says, we're going to give more money to the CBC. So, I mean, it's pretty clear why they would be biased. I mean, it seems that they had motivation towards it. And at the same time, outlets like ourselves, which is, I think, really important to a fabric of democracy to have multiple voices, right? Like, I mean, again, we have the most experienced newsroom. How do you justify choking off that news source?
I think that's right. And I think one thing Canada benefits from in something like electoral redistricting is we do have a bipartisan process that it's not a single party deciding how to change the boundaries of districts. I think you're absolutely right that any public system that allocates news funding should have that same kind of bipartisan or cross-partisan decision making behind it, or you will get even unintentional biases, yeah, to say nothing of intentional ones.
I mean, and I think there was the U.S. State Department put out a piece saying that Bill C-18, along with the Online News Act and the Online Streaming Act, is an attempt to suppress freedom of speech here in Canada. What is your thoughts on that?
I think that's strong. I think there are speech concerns at times with some measures that the government has taken. The Online Harms Act that didn't pass, for example, had some measures in it that had some very serious potential speech chilling measures in it that did not pass. It's a little bit tough to take the US government entirely seriously, though, raising those kind of concerns currently, because they're doing quite a few things themselves that are very bad for speech. It's not a great time for freedom of expression, I would say, in multiple democracies, unfortunately.
What do you think, though, of Bill C-18 if it continues on? Like, we're going to see, like, I know lots of outlets. I even talked to other outlets and said, why aren't you doing stories on Bill C-18? And they're just like, Jim, we can't because we don't want to jeopardize our funding that we are getting. So we basically crippled media. You know what I mean? Like, you take media, you take away their audience, because most outlets have lost half their traffic. I mean, that's a given, including CBC, lost half their traffic. With that, many of them lost half their revenue from other than government funding. So then you have this scheme where you kind of like funnel money to the outlets. But I mean, that money is supposed to end in 2026 as well. So, because they upped it, during election time, they upped it from 25% of the salaries to 35% of the salaries. And that's supposed to drop to 15, I think, in 26 or 27 to nothing. And then so these outlets are weakened to the point where they're near collapse. Look at Chorus's stock chart, which is global news. I mean, that thing used to trade in the 20s, and now it's at 9 cents. They have over $1 billion in debt. Like, how do they survive if the only way media is to survive in Canada is at government handouts? And it's not enough to expand businesses. It's basically enough to kind of, continue to lay off. And we've seen the layoffs over and over and over again. So where's viable business models if this Bill C-18 is to continue here? Because we had a viable business model. We had a viable business model. We were doing well. We were actually going to roll it out across Canada. NowMedia was going to roll out because we have all these nows, and we were going to roll them across Canada. And this basically just put a knee in our throat. And at the same time, they said, we're here to help.
I completely agree. And I unfortunately, not to add additional bad news, but I do think more and more people are getting some of their news from discussions with LLM agents rather than going to a news site or doing a Google search. Yeah. They're just asking a bot to go out and do a search for them. And I think the government needs to not just undo some of the damage that they've done previously. They need to think about what the viable revenue model is going to be for news if no one or very few people are going to a news website, if it's all being filtered through these bots. How is Canada going to make sure that we still have journalists doing high quality journalism? Because we do still need human beings to go out into the community to do difficult investigative research and to come back with, truth telling that we're not going to get any other way. But I think the revenue model is under further stress now, actually.
And I think one of the things that we've really noticed is there's a lot of YouTubers that are sprung up. And they don't really do news, they do commentary. So they take somebody's news, they steal our news, like we do the work. They take our news, put it up on a post or whatever, and they get to go on Facebook. And you're just like, how? How do they get to go on Facebook with our news? Because there's no link to a news site, I guess. And then, basically there's our hard work, and then we don't even get to monetize that. And we're seeing that over and over again. We're seeing these accounts that just, take off because there's this vacuum. And these YouTube accounts, and you probably know many of them, but they don't do journalism. Like, they don't have, like, if you phone here, you can phone and talk to a reporter here at Kelowna Now. You can actually speak to a reporter. And we have, you know what I mean? Like, and we're in the local community, so we have responsibility. You see them at the grocery store, all that kind of stuff. Whereas, the YouTubers across Canada can say whatever they want, and plus there's no way to contact them other than through social media. That's
right. Opinion is cheap, and research is expensive and hard. And it takes time. It doesn't reward just the most recent news cycle. And in one way or another, Canada needs to make sure that there is a financial reward for generating that actual high quality initial work rather than just circulating takes all day.
Well, why do you think that the Liberals are sticking to this? Because it's pretty evident. Like, you look at the raw data, half the traffic's gone, half the revenue's gone for all outlets, including CBC, right? Including the CBC.
Mhm.
And then you see all these failures, close to 100, last time we looked, have failed. And then you look at they're spending money on Facebook. They're spending money. The Liberal government is spending money on Facebook. And now they won't even tell us what they're spending. Like, I mean, how is that a transparent and accountable government? And then you have the other side saying they will repeal Bill C-18. How do they continue to defend it? I know how they defend it. They just won't answer to it. But, like, can you come up with an argument why to defend Bill C-18?
So the argument its defenders will make is that $100 million has gone to some outlets that would not have occurred otherwise through the Google deal. Google has agreed to a version of Bill C-18. It's a much reduced version of what was originally proposed, but it's something. So there are some news outlets in this country that are somewhat happy with the deal. I don't think it's a good deal for the public, or certainly for most outlets. But there is some constituency of news outlets that will say it's been kind of okay for them.
I would say that Google deal is probably going to die anyway, because of what's going on in the United States, like the protections that the J.D. Vance and Trump are doing for tech outlets. I doubt if Google's ready and willing to pony up, especially when they look at Facebook, and Facebook says, yeah, I don't think so. And it's worked out well for Facebook, right? Facebook is, like, not hurting. If you look at their stock chart, whether they have news on Facebook or not, they could care less.
And that's where I think Canadians really have to do some soul searching and figure out what's right for us. Like, is it important to us to have Canadian journalists doing real journalism in every major Canadian community, or every community beyond a certain size? I would argue it is. We need at least one, if not a couple. And so we need to make sure that business models like yours are as viable as they can be. And if there are some communities, I think, that fall below the level in which you can run a viable business for now, it shouldn't just be the CBC. The government needs to find another way of getting local journalists on the ground there.
Yeah, I interviewed a small paper out in, I think it was Nova Scotia, out in the Atlantic provinces anyway, and there was basically two of them, husband and wife, and they put out about 2 stories a month, and they were getting funded, and we weren't, right, with a big newsroom and that, and we've had to do layoffs. Like, we've closed a couple of the Now outlets as well, and then you get Aaron Gunn that asked the question in the House of Commons there of Stephen Guilbeault, because he's now in charge of Bill C-18. Questioning Bill C-18, and Stephen Guilbeault said it was immoral to question that. I don't understand how bills are immoral how it's immoral to question a bill.
I think Stephen Guilbeault has not been the best government advocate for any of the bills that he's led on, frankly. I think he's not a policy guy, and I think he's not an effective advocate for even the things that he's supporting, not on Bill C-18 and not on C-11.
So what do we do? What do outlets like us do? Do we just fold it up, Matt, or where can we go, or what should we do? Because, it seems like it's a war on local independent media for sure. And they were warned, like the Conservatives warned, like we've done so many stories on this. They were warned that this would happen, that it is the upstarts, the local independent media that's going to get crushed in this. And we've interviewed Michael Geist. We've interviewed a couple other academics that say the same thing. And then recently, there's been, I think it was Canadian Press did a couple stories on, and then basically it was just pumping. They interviewed a couple of academics that obviously have liberal bias and that, and they pumping the tires of Bill C-18 without like looking at the work we've done or even asking for another side of that. So it seems to be very one-sided journalism, and that's coming from Canadian Press.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a magic wand here. I don't know how to solve the problem overnight, but I do think there's some really important parts of the story to keep telling. Like, I think documenting the disappearance of outlets and really raising that with the Canadian public and with politicians, I think that matters. It was good to see senators last year calling the CBC and the CRTC to account on this. I think one of the things that I think the Trudeau government certainly discovered, and that this government will find as well, is that good wishes and good press releases don't determine reality. Reality continues to do the things that it will do. And if we find ourselves in a world in Canada where just more and more local outlets continue to close, I mean, surely at some point the government will feel some level of pressure from the public to do something to halt it. Certainly, we rally people in our community to pressure them to do something to guarantee diverse Canadian news.
Why do you guys fight for this? What's your kind of like your stake in this? What drives you guys?
Well, I think we originally came into it from the lens of digital policy. Our work is specific to digital issues. So we work for freedom of expression, privacy, and access to the internet. I think in recent years, we've been focusing more on what makes democracy work. And democracy doesn't work without a diversity of press. If there's not people holding every party to account, calling them on their BS and pointing out their lies, not just partisans from the other party, but really people that are trying to be fair and to be fact-based. We end up in a system where it's just whoever's take you want to believe, rather than the truth actually having an impact on policy, and that doesn't lead to any good things for our country or our nation.
Do you think that Bill C-18 affected the recent election? Do you think just having many independent outlets kind of removed from Facebook, because basically we were removed from Facebook, and then the Liberals could put their message on there, and then CBC, I think there were some promoted posts there from the Globe and Mail and stuff like that too, right? Obviously they have the money to do that. Do you think that played a role? Do you think that was knowingly done, or maybe that was just a bonus for the Liberals?
It may have played some role, but the thing that I worry most about is how much paid content is occurring in the dark on Facebook. So all of the parties, the Conservative, Liberals, and NDP, they all spend very heavily on meta platforms. Yeah. We have a huge campaign around voter privacy because people don't know this. In Canada, due to some weird stuff around our laws, the political parties are essentially exempt from most privacy law. They don't have to play by the rules that companies have to play by, or the government has to play by, with what they do with your data or my data in how they target voters. And we're extremely worried that I think there's some level of manipulative voter targeting right now that is only going to go up and up and up with the power of AI behind it. It's going to be very easy, I think, to say completely contradictory things to different voters and have a chatbot convince them of it in the future if we don't get good transparency laws and regulations on voter data soon.
Have you guys faced any backlash from the Liberals at all on you bringing Bill C-18?
Yes, very much so. I mean, it's not like we've been investigated or faced any kind of, official consequences, but we've been accused of any number of things. And I think they tend to expect civil society in Canada to be deferential to them and don't like it when you just call shots as you see them.
Yeah, for us, the two times the Prime Minister visited Kelowna, they wouldn't tell us the first time where Justin Trudeau was going to be. So we had to find out from a source here, another local government source that told us. So we kind of got in there because they couldn't keep us out when we got in there. And we were, allowed a question, which is our, you can go online and you can see the question to Justin Trudeau and Bill C-18. And then the second time, again, our managing editor sent probably 20 emails to try to get that information. And then we got in there as well, and we were allowed one question and no follow-up. And we had gone in there, we wanted two questions to ask. We wanted to Bill C-18, and we wanted to ask the question on the BC ferries. And we figured, well, we better do Bill C-18 because nobody's going to ask that. And for sure, somebody's going to ask on the BC ferries, and nobody asked on it. It seems odd that media in Canada is not asking the question that seems to be on the tip of the common man's tongue. Do you know what I mean? Those common questions aren't being done by media that is really at the begging bowl for funding.
Yeah. Well, I hope you don't take offense to this, but I think media is very weak in Canada right now. I
don't take offense at all. I recognize it. Yeah. They've done it. They've crippled us. They've basically crippled us.
I think there's some recent decisions. I also think the demise of the advertising model that supported things previously is a huge change. Much media hasn't fully adjusted to. But I think people don't realize how many fewer reporters there are in any given beat than there used to be, and how much harder you all have to work, and that it's just becoming increasingly impossible.
And it's we had figured it out, and we had a really good model. And I'm just going to tell you, here's one part of the government that cuts us off, puts their knee in our throat, takes half our traffic, and other forms of the government, that were advertising with us, let's say BC Lotteries and other, BC Dairy, stuff like that. And then they'd say, you know what, Jim, we can't advertise until you get your Facebook and Instagram back because that's where your audience is. And we're just like, okay. And they were spending a lot with us. And so that was taken away from us. Like I said, half the revenue, half the traffic. Obviously, if you lose the traffic, you lose the revenue, right? And it's just, And then so, we're scrappy, and so we're trying to do what we can, but obviously we've had to cut back in so many areas, and we cut CP as well. Again,
Yeah.
we just thought CP, I mean, not helping us, and everybody else has CP on their thing. You can go get CP anywhere you want. So we're going to focus it's actually made us sharpen our pencil, focus on lots of these types of interviews and lots of original content stories where we can dig into and provide that. And you're right on the AI thing. We do lots on AI as well. And AI is likely going to change a lot of, like, some of the bigger outlets. The New York Times is starting to use AI a lot in writing some of the stuff too, right? So pretty soon you're going to get a really kind of like echo chamber of a narrative if you don't have that diversity of voices.
Yeah, it's a huge concern, and whoever is getting top billing in feeding the AI agents, of course, is going to have a huge impact on what people know, even more so than mainstream media do currently. I think our message for now is really the government needs to start looking forward to dealing with AI and figuring out how to support journalism in that environment. But we cannot be a one-outlet country. It can't be CBC. It couldn't be anyone else. We need to have a real diversity of both national voices, but also very in the community voices, because no one knows Kelowna like you do. And the government, I think, just doesn't see out small outlets a lot of the time. If that's the most generous interpretation I think you can give it.
I did a really good interview with this is a BC nurse here, Amy Ham, that's had a lot of national attention. I interviewed her lawyer, Lisa Bildy, and we talked about. And she said this stuck with me because she said one of the big things, the key points in this, is that the United States of America exports basically its culture to the world, right? Especially all the culture wars. It exports that, but with not the protections that they have, the First Amendment rights. You know what I mean? Like they get the culture war, but they also get First Amendment protections, and we don't have that in Canada. I mean, she talked about this paragraph, which is really interesting. She said, our governments have been working really hard to take this, what they call guardrails, that's a nice way to say it, and kind of compressing the guardrails on freedom of speech, and as opposed to expanding our right to freedom of speech. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I mean, I think Canada has a very different history than the US, and there's pros and cons to each approach. We're often asking the government to at least honor how freedom of expression has traditionally worked offline in Canada in online regulation. And I think it's a struggle for them to understand how to do that a lot of the time. So for a very long time, Canadians have accepted that there's some criminalization of hate speech offline, and that is part of how we've defined ourselves as a country, for good or ill. But I think sometimes the government either will propose something way more aggressive than what we've seen offline in terms of policing speech online, or they bring a similar or the same text to the online space, but so much more space is caught up in the eye of government online than would be in offline spaces. The same law can have a much more invasive impact. People, I'm sure, say all kinds of things in their daily life, and it's not a problem. We all just move on. Online, though, everything is caught up by platforms or government, and everything can potentially get people in trouble. So there's sort of different considerations to making sure we have a similar balance to offline spaces.
We try to keep these interviews around 30 minutes to be cognizant of your time. And is there anything else you want to add today? I mean, we'd like to catch up with you again as this story develops. It's an ongoing saga that we kind of like trudge our way through.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would just love to talk more with you both around further impacts of C18. Maybe sometime we could get someone who likes C18 and have a three-way conversation about it.
That would be great. Like we've asked.
That'd be fun.
We've asked. Yeah. Ian has done an interview with Michael Geist. He's one of Canada's leading media lawyers, and that interview is going up right away. He said it's a really bad idea, and you'd think that the CP would have interviewed him for another side of that story, but they didn't. And he's in opposition to it as well, as so are the Conservatives, right? So.
Yeah, well, in most cases, I think media has a decent diversity of perspectives. C18 has not been a good one for that, right? For exactly the reason you say, because most media knows that they will potentially benefit from the bill passing or the bill staying in effect, or at least they thought before it actually passed. And so it was not a fair and even-handed policy conversation in media, unfortunately. My
warning to media is simply this. If you're basing your revenue model, like your existence, on government handouts, and the government changes, that's it. That's the end of your news outlet. So we shouldn't be basing any kind of business structure, private business structure, on government handouts. Like that should not be that should be a no-go for all business outlets. They say temporary measure, but these outlets will not survive if that government money is pulled from them. They need to have that freedom to do what they need to do to develop a successful business model. The Canadian taxpayer shouldn't be on the hook for media. I think all media funding should be stopped. All of it should be stopped, including, whatever we get. You know what I mean? I think because we're well within our means, if they give us back the audience we earned, to go ahead and make this a viable business.
I'm sure that's true for you and for some outlets. I am worried that AI is a game changer here. I'm worried it's going to permanently destabilize what existed of the viable business models for media. Maybe it won't. Maybe it's going to burn off and not work that way. But if it does, I think the government needs to think very seriously about a much simpler and more transparent system for ensuring compensation is going to journalism, or we're going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, I think it has to be something fair if it's going to. If there's going to be anything like it shouldn't be one just eating at the trough. Because I would say right now CBC is at the trough. Like when they got that $150 million extra, they went right away and they gave themselves a raise. The executives, they took that and they said, well, Canadians don't like bonuses, so we just added onto our paychecks. Nothing for the journalists, but they all took a raise, which is just ludicrous. So the CBC eats at the trough, and then there's the other legacy media that kind of gets some scraps and crumbs and stuff like that. And then whatever falls off the table, maybe small independent outlets like ourselves can, like pick at the morsels on the floor, right?
Yeah. Well, we'd like to see CBC out of advertising entirely. It doesn't make sense for them to double collect on that front.
I mean, they weren't supposed to be in that Google money either. But all of a sudden they showed up there, right?
Yeah. Well, and then they were going to be the biggest beneficiary for a while. But anyway,
I
also have to run.
Their hand out. All right. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch up again at some point.
A pleasure.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for watching NowMedia.
Take care.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government